All right. Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. I'm your host, Brandon Troy, host and co creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. And apologize for the little echo that we have here. I am still mobile and in commute, but seeing that it is the weekend of Halloween, I figured we get into a special edition episode of talking about, some of the awesome horror movies that are around. If you guys aren't aware, as many times as I've brought it up, of being a horror buff and enjoying horror films, I like to also get into my top 10. Maybe you have a top 10, and I'd like to know if our top tens are comparable in terms of our tastes or what have you. But I won't be alone in talking about the my top 10 horror films to watch during Halloween. I will be joined by a member of our team, Josh Pritchett. So let me bring him on.
Hey, Brandon. Hello, everyone
What's
out
going
there.
on, man? How you doing?
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween indeed, man. So yes, as I said, this is our episode talking about our top 10 with our top 10 horror films that enjoy to watch during Halloween. Now, before I hop into it, basically this is how it's going to go. We're going to go into our respective top tens, going back and forth, starting from 10 and working our way up, of course, to number one. But before I do that, I wanted to get into some stipulations of like some of the rules or things that I tried to use because I was talking to you about this, Josh, offline, and talking about with all the horror films that are out there, and the leagues and leagues of films that are out there that we've had over the years, classics and even ones that have come out more recently. It was really hard to narrow down this list, and it was very difficult to push out some films out of the top 10 that initially I was thinking, yeah, of course they're in my top 10, but when I really had to kind of like grind my teeth in terms of like some of the rules that I came up with to rationalize why they weren't, it wasn't a painful process, but it was a very tricky process because
Yeah.
we have some films that we may just have a solo installment, and then we have others that are franchises. So some of the rules that I went by is, what kind of concept the film came up with that, was really original and unique in terms of, what they had that was the horrifying aspect that it brought to the table. That was one factor. So like that concept was initial. I'll mark that as like number one, if you will. If it was a franchise, me looking at the franchise at a glance and seeing, okay, obviously, with franchises, there are going to be installments that you like, there are going to be installments that you don't like, but as an overall package, for all the installments that the franchise has had, does it have far more good installments than lackluster ones? And
Yeah.
so there were some instances where like, yeah, the original film is very, is a classic and it's awesome, but because of its other installments and me, packaging the whole franchise as a whole, it knocked it out of the top 10 for me because, the installments that followed it were lackluster or weren't as good. And then it was one other factor. So, like I said, concept, um, the franchise as a whole, picturing each of those installments and basically kind of like averaging it out as a whole. And then additionally, its longevity. So like, yeah, you have a an awesome concept. Does it still hold up? Like you can watch it even if it's come out 20 years ago, 30 years ago, however long it still holds up as an effective horror movie. So like, that's gonna raise a film higher in my list if it can demonstrate that it can still be effective years later. So like you'll probably notice as a trend, there are not really that many modern, like recent horror films that are going to
Mhm.
be in my top, at the very top half because they still have, they still have to stand the test of time and show me that they can still be effective years later for me. And the ones that are on the top half are those that have been around for a while, yet they still work. they still work, in my opinion, as horror films. I don't know if there were any rules on your end, Josh, that you wanted to get into before we hop into our respective top tens.
I think my overarching rule is: did this movie make an impression on me? Did it scare me? Was it well acted? Like you said, does it stand the test of time? And I think I have a mix of films on my list that are both a little bit newer, but also quite a few that would be considered classics that are still my go-to films around this time of year when I'm thinking, okay, I want to watch a horror movie. Oh, okay. But yeah, I didn't really think about the franchise thing so much. I mean, there are on my list are a couple of films that are considered franchise films, but I wasn't really thinking so much about that. I was thinking just, is the individual film itself good? But yeah, I mean, a bad, the franchise goes from, really good to not so good anymore. It can make you reconsider the original film, because it's been dragged down by all these newer sequels of it.
For sure, for sure. And, seeing Josh that you are joining me, on this chat, I'll have you start off first with your number 10. So go ahead and take it away.
Okay. For number 10, I'm going with a fairly new film, 2014's The Taking of Deborah Logan. This is directed and co-written by Adam Robitel and co-written with Gavin Hilferman. Stars Jill Larson, Annie Ramsey, and Michelle Yang. Basically, the premise of the film is Michelle Ong's character is a medical student who's making a documentary about a woman named Deborah who lives in Southside, Virginia, who is in the progressive stages of dementia and Alzheimer's. But as the film progresses, we begin to discover that Deborah isn't just suffering from dementia. She is apparently possessed by a demonic entity, one that she has some previous experience with. It is causing her to display not only abnormal behavior, but at times even abnormal physical abilities, such as suddenly being able to, leap up onto a kitchen counter at one point. This is a found footage horror film, but they set it up so that, because they are observing this lady, Deborah, in her home, they are putting cameras all over the house so that they can capture her in her environment as the disease progresses and begins to destroy her mind. But as they quickly begin to find out, there are other very bizarre things going on here. One of the reasons it really scared me is apparently the demonic entity is connected with snakes, and I am really scared of snakes. So that was something that definitely creeped me out. But I really enjoyed this film. Like I said, Annie Ramsey from the TV show Mad About You stars in it. I thought that would be kind of a distraction at first, but she's such a good actress that I was able to, put aside remembering the character she played on that show. Because the thing about found footage horror films, or any found footage film really, is you want the actors to be somewhat obscure to kind of put you in this world where, is this really happened? Did this really happen? But no,
Sure.
Annie Ramsey was amazing. So.
Awesome choice. And I've had a lot of people recommend that film for me and tell me, oh, you got to check out this film. And I've seen so many moments of it. I feel like I've seen a lot of parts of it. I just haven't seen it, from beginning to end. And what I've seen has been very, intriguing and interesting. So, I definitely need to get around to doing that. For this film, it's definitely on my list. I will check it out this weekend for sure. So for my my number 10 is none other than Final Destination. So 2000's Final Destination. If you guys aren't familiar with it, it basically followed a student, Alex Browning, played by Devin Sawa, who, among a group of high school students, getting ready for a trip, he has a premonition of dying on the flight, and upon having that premonition, he is able to convince not only the rest of his classmates. He's able to get all his classmates and himself off the plane. And even though at the time they think that he's like, out of his mind, wacko, crazy, it comes to pass that the premonition ends up coming true, and that very plane that he thought that would explode in his dream moments before actually does explode, the plane that they get off of. And then what follows is basically a cat and mouse game with death, just basically taking them out one by one, in very creative and unexpected ways. So I guess for this film, the reason why this film like really strikes a chord with me is just that idea that oftentimes when we have a lot of horror films, we deal with horror films that deal with like creatures of some kind, or we have a slasher, and like at least when it's something physical, like that, it's something that you can foresee that, okay, maybe I can get away from this, maybe I can run away, maybe I can escape. But how do you escape death? Like, there is no way to really, I mean, that is a supernatural force that you can't really fathom in terms of whether you can touch, or a physical entity that you feel that you can get away from. And with this film, it showed us how not only how insurmountable it felt to have death after you, like a force of nature like that, death being after you, but also the creativity in which they had a lot of those deaths with a lot of the characters, because they tried to figure out plausible ways, ways in which people end up biting the bullet, in plausible ways that you would see in this film. But, they add that kind of supernatural edge to it in terms of showing kind of like cause and effect, where you would have, the wind may blow, but death is behind it. The wind may blow and it may cause a cascading effect where it knocks over a tree, that knocks over, knocks down, destroys a house. And then maybe because of the spark from, the house being destroyed, causes another, disastrous event that eventually leads to one of the characters being, offed in the movie. So I'm trying to think. There was one that I recall in what was it, part one in the first entry, because at this point there've been quite a few. I want to say there've been 5, if I am being accurate on the number of installments. I'll confirm that in a moment. I want to say, yeah, there would have been 5. But it was the film, just to give you an idea of like the pedigree. As I said, you have Devin Sawa in there, you have Ali Larter, who went on to do a lot of the Resident Evil installments, not the one that's coming out, but the prior one. And then also, we have director James Wong, directing this film too, the first installment, which, as we know, James Wong went on to do far more films, and especially films that are in the horror realm. But did you have any thoughts on that, Josh, about the number 10 that I had?
I've seen it one time. It was an enjoyable film. I thought that it was very clever. This idea that, okay, when your time's up, and
Exactly.
that you're not going to cheat the Reaper. The Reaper is going to get you somewhere or other. I think in the first one there was this one scene where the main character, he's trying to stay in his house, and it seems like the Reaper is just setting up all these random things that could lead to this, really
these obstacles.
death. Yeah, it becomes kind of comical. You have to laugh a little bit. You have to have sort of a sense of humor. But you're right; it is a cat and mouse kind of game between the Reaper, which I don't think you see it in the first film. I don't know if you see it in the other ones, but you definitely don't see him. That adds something, because this is in a genre where you're used to seeing the killer appear, like a Jason or a Freddy movie. This, there's no death doesn't have a physical form in any of these movies until towards the end, I don't think.
Until it's too late. But I
Yeah.
mean, that it manifests itself in a lot of these, accidents that end up taking place.
Yeah. But I think it was very clever. It was a very clever concept. I've had a lot of people come up and tell me that I should really check out the other ones at some point, and I should. Because it does sound like it gets more intriguing. But yeah, the first one is a real fun movie. It's definitely worth checking out.
For sure, for sure. All right, and switching gears, we want to switch over to number 9. Josh, I already have you up on up here, so go ahead and take it away. What do you have for your number 10?
For number 9, I have Psycho,
or number
the
9,
original.
I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, directed by, of course, Alfred Hitchcock, with a screenplay by Joseph Stefano, based on the novel by Robert Bloch. And, of course, it stars Anthony Perkins, Janet Leigh, Vera Miles, and John Calvin. Basically, the movie starts out. It follows the book very, very religiously, by the way. It starts out with Janet Leigh having an afternoon tryst with her boyfriend, and he has to go back to work, and we find out he has all these debts and other problems that are preventing them from getting married. So Janet's character comes up with this idea to steal a large amount of money that her boss has been given for a real estate deal. And then she's driving from where she lives in Phoenix, Arizona, to her boyfriend's home in Southern California. Along the way, she ends up stopping at a motel called the Bates Motel, and where she meets a man named Norman, played by Anthony Perkins, who is also the manager of this hotel. And at first, we think this is kind of a standard Hitchcock thriller. This woman makes this bad decision, this crazy decision to embezzle this money and try to escape. But then, while she's taking a shower, someone comes into the bathroom and stabs her to death while she's in the shower. And that begins the second half of the movie, where it becomes not a standard Hitchcock mystery, but a flat-out horror film. As it goes on, a private detective is trying to find Janet Leigh, and he is also killed at the Bates Motel. And finally, Vera Miles, who plays Janet Leigh's sister, she and the boyfriend track down the hotel, where they ultimately discover that Norman, who says his mother has these moods and these fits, we find out she is dead and she is in the root cellar, and Norman oftentimes dresses up as his mother and kills people. And in the end, the whole thing is explained that basically Norman had some years before murdered his mother and began to live this double life because his mind could not accept that he had done this awful thing. Robert Bloch, this is really interesting how he came up with the original story. Robert Bloch was driving through Wisconsin some point in the late 1950s, and he stopped in this diner, and on the radio that was playing in the diner, they were recounting the arrest of a man named Ed Gein, who went on to be known as the Butcher of Plainfield. Geen had murdered 3 women and desecrated a number of graves in Plainfield cemeteries, and apparently had this real obsession with trying to make a woman's bodysuit. Basically, Geen was very obsessed with his mother, who was this dominant figure in his life, but she had died. There's no indication, of course, that Geen had done that. But the idea stuck in Bloch's mind, and so he wrote this book, and Alfred Hitchcock bought the rights to it, and of course he made the movie. The only place that I think it really differentiates between the book and the movie is Bloch described Norman as being very overweight and an alcoholic, and Hitchcock went with, obviously, Perkins, who was much skinnier and doesn't drink at all. Is very shy and unassuming kind of guy. And I think that works better because it does fixate the idea that Norman is just this guy, and you wouldn't think he was capable of doing something so horrible, and yet he does. So it is interesting. There were several sequels that were made 20 years after the first movie came out that
right.
Yeah. And they kind of go with the idea in the sequels that Norman is actually that he doesn't have mental illness, that he's actually, his mother's soul is inside him, that he has this weird possession, and then he turns into his mother, a la Bruce Banner into the Hulk. I mean, not physically, but just mentally becomes her, and that he can't really control this situations. Which I don't think I like as much. I like more the idea that he has this dual personality thing that he undergoes in the original film. What are your thoughts? Have you ever seen this?
Yeah. So, film. I remember in high school, like I had to watch. I watched it quite a few times then, but also when I used to take a lot of like film related courses over the summer, like preliminary like college courses, before entering before entering college. I would take a lot of high school related courses that they would have over the summer, and that would be a film that we would watch constantly in terms of how they executed a lot of those scenes. And I mean, it goes without saying, how iconic, the shower scene is. Everyone knows that scene. This film is definitely on my list. It's not as high as it is with yours, but I have my reasons for that, which I'll get into once I get to it. But it's definitely on my top 10, and you guys will see where it falls among that top 10. But yes, no, I have seen it. And I've seen I've seen the remake, I guess, what is it, Vince Vaughn?
Yeah.
That they had years after that. And then also, of course, the TV series too, that they had, exploring, that relationship of between mother and son. So
yeah, the Bates Motel.
Yes, indeed. All right. So let me get into my number 9. So my number 9 is a slasher film from the 90s, in 1996 to be correct, and that is Scream. All right, so Scream, as I said, arrived in 1996. It was a film that was directed by Wes Craven. The Nightmare on Elm Street. Yes, that Wes Craven. And it was written by Kevin Williamson. Kevin Williamson, actually, I'll get into also, because now that it is, we have the late Wes Craven, who directed the installments in this franchise. Writer Kevin Williamson is actually taking the reins of the franchise, which I'll get to. But basically, the thing that was cool, I'll give the premise first, and then I'll get into the concept. So the premise goes as follows. The idea of after a young woman loses her mother, she's terrorized by a killer who knows like the rules of horror films, and it gets into a lot of those. Give me one sec. It gets into the lore that we expect with a lot of horror films, which I do like. So that was actually one of the things that, even though it has kind of that basis that we've seen before with like slasher movies, of having like a killer that slashes a lot of, has that idea of slashing of people that we've seen maybe with Michael Myers or with Jason.
Yeah.
The thing that was interesting is just that idea of kind of turning the expectations of a horror film on its head and really playing with the tropes that we know with horror films and like about horror films and really subverting them. So, you had a lot of those elements of them, I guess, being really meta about the things that we enjoy about horror films, of things that we commonly see, which is, you have a group of people and there's a killer that's on the loose and they said, oh, we should split up. So, like, just commenting on a lot of those things that we as audience members, we screamed at the audience, like, don't do these things, or don't do this, or don't do that. Like, they are privy to a lot of those rules, and yet not only are our characters privy to those rules, or experts, if you will, but the killer is also, aware of a lot of those tropes, and they kind of play with those expectations. That was really cool. And then, kind of similar to, it's kind of funny. This wasn't on purpose, mind you, but I guess it was just it was meant to be. Is just the idea that in Psycho, you have the star of the film, bite the bullet super early in the movie. And then, like, you have a similar thing happen in Scream. Like, in the first one, we had Drew Barrymore in
Yeah.
the first film, and like, she's a huge star, and you kill her off in the opening, like the opening scene of the movie. Like, you do something like that, all bets are off.
Yeah.
Typically in a horror film, again, playing with the tropes, you're killing off, you're not killing off your star actress or actor in the opening sequence of the film. So, like, it really puts people on edge when you really catch them off guard that way. But what are your thoughts? I guess one other thing that I will say is going into those rules that I was talking about with, and this is a picture of the poster, by the way, or it's an
Yeah.
image of it, but going into like the overall franchise, like, another reason why I had this as my number 9, and you'll probably wonder why some other films are not going to feature on here in this top 10, is that as a franchise, it's actually pretty solid. So, like, the first one is great. I like the second one. Um, I know some people feel kind of iffy on the third one. I like the third one. I like the fact that it comes really full circle with, like, the family aspect that they did in the third one. The
Hmm.
fourth one is okay, and I guess the jury's still out on the fifth one. As I said, the writer from the first installment, Kevin Williamson, he's hopping on to do take the directorial reins, if you will,
Yeah.
of the upcoming film. So I guess the jury's still out on, the fifth installment, but at least from the four that we've gotten, it's a solid horror franchise. And like, you can't really say that about, franchises that go to their third or fourth one, their fourth installment, and still be pretty good. So what are your thoughts?
Well, as I've said, I'm not the biggest fan of Scream, but it's okay. It's an enjoyable movie. I think Courtney Cox is really terrific. As is David Arquette and the rest of the cast.
And I didn't even mention Nev Campbell, still around and kicking. So
Oh yeah, they're still there. They're coming back for this new one, which, even though, like I said, I'm not the biggest Scream fan, I am somewhat intrigued. I mean, that what's going to happen with this. I mean, no, it's, like you said, it is a solid franchise, and it is at times really fun. It's quite humorous in places. They are making fun of a lot of these tropes and saying, oh, you got to follow these rules. These are the way, and it's all about playing by these rules, um, which I think some ways it feels like it's sort of overdone for uh, some of the issues I had with American horror movies at that time, because they just seemed to follow this formula and they didn't seem to really want to change it. Uh, but otherwise, no, it is a solid movie, and you're right, it is a very solid franchise. So that's it is, I can see why a lot of people really do like it.
All right, cool beans. Well, you are up at bat again. Number 8. Go for it.
Okay, number 8, I have Paranormal Activity. Produced, written, directed, photographed, and edited by Orwin Pell, starring Katie Featherston and Mika Sloan. I am a big fan of found footage horror. I think it can be very clever, especially if you're working on a very tight budget. It's something you can have a lot of fun with. I know that a lot of people have been angry for about 20 years whenever you bring up the Blair Witch Project, because they're like, I think honestly that's because there was so much hype behind it, and then they realized, oh, it was all fake, and then suddenly people got angry about it. But I enjoyed that movie. But Paranormal Activity is even creepier. Uh, Especially basically, I'll go down the plot of it. This young man named Mika, who describes himself as a day trader. He is living with his girlfriend in Southern California. And his girlfriend has had an on again, off again history with being haunted by some sort of malevolent entity that has been following her since she was a small child. And they call in a paranormal psychologist to, examine things, and he tries to give them some advice. Mika, trying to be a total alpha male, he wants to try to get visual proof that the thing exists, but he's also keeps hinting that he wants to get a Ouija board and try to communicate with this thing, even though the psychologist tells him he shouldn't do that because that might, be something really bad. Well, a lot of the footage goes on at night when they're asleep, and you see things like doors open and sheets being pulled. And at one point, they put talcum powder in the hallway outside their bedroom, and then these footprints appear in the bedroom the next morning. And then Micah decides, I'm going to try the Ouija board. So he gets a Ouija board. He tries it, even though it infuriates his girlfriend. And they leave to go to a movie or something. And right as they leave, the Ouija board catches on fire. And the camera is still sitting there filming this. And as the film progresses, it becomes more and more evident that the malevolent force is gaining more control over Katie and is becoming more violent, is throwing books, throwing objects, making things appear. It gets very disturbing right up until the very end. I really enjoyed it. I found it to be a very creepy film. And like with Scream, I thought at least the second and third installments of the series were really good. I never watched the fourth one. I heard that was not very good. So, Brandon, what are your thoughts on it?
So I guess I enjoy the first Paranormal Activity, but I guess the reason why, and I'll be transparent now, it's not on my top 10. It is, in my list, maybe top 20, perhaps top 15. But the only reason why it's not in the top 20 is that I felt that as a franchise, there wasn't really a need for the story to continue. I felt that as just a single entry, like it would be very effective. And I feel like it kind of got diluted by having the other installments. And then I feel like they kind of lost their way where the plot got really convoluted in terms of how they were trying to connect everything. So, and because there might have been some time between one film or the other and all these characters, like I'll be honest, it got kind of convoluted, and it made me lose interest like once we got into the latter installments. And I've seen all of them, so like in that same way, like the last one I didn't really care that much for. I know that there's another one out now. I plan on checking that out because I'm still intrigued and interested, based on the IP. But just based on the franchise as a whole, going back to those stipulations that, helped me to be able to designate, one film over another. I would have had it pretty high on my list if it was just the one installment versus it being a franchise.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's where I stand on it, where at least with that particular IP.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think as this thing goes on, it begins harder. It gets harder and harder to sustain the idea of it. Like, okay, so Mika and his girlfriend are videotaping themselves while trying to document this, haunting that they're experiencing. Okay, why are all these other people taping themselves? I mean, why do they keep doing it? What's going on here? And that does kind of not help. But I think, like I said, I think the second one is not bad. I think though it is a franchise with diminishing returns. It's like, oh, we made a lot of money on this one. Let's make a sequel. Okay, so now
Right.
we have to find a way to make that work.
For
And
sure. For
yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
All right. So, hopping into my number eight. My number eight is none other than VHS. So, this film that arrived in 2012 has actually had other installments. It has three to be exact. As a matter of fact, one that just recently came out, which I'll get into. But the reason why I bring up this film is that which you'll find, and you'll find it again as a trend among my top 10, is that I love horror anthology films. Whether they're horror anthology films or even horror, anthology TV series. So, thinking of Tales from the Crypt, I enjoyed that series a great deal, or even thinking of other shows, maybe Tales from the Dark Side or The Outer Limits that have, those horror elements in it. I just enjoy the ability to be able to tell, sometimes you don't need 2 hours or hour and a half, whatever it may be, 90, 120 minutes to tell a story. Sometimes, a story is effective enough just being as a short, maybe 15, 20-minute tale that, is very concise and succinct. And sometimes being concise and succinct like that allows you to tell, a pretty, not only intriguing story, but a pretty gruesome one. There's an opportunity to have, a lot of scary elements in it. And so, with VHS, along the lines of what you were saying, Josh, earlier about Blair Witch, because I enjoy that film too, is that it has that same quality, but it incorporates not only the found footage quality, but it also incorporates some aesthetic of what is it, nostalgia with using VHS tapes. I'm old enough to remember having a VCR and using VHS tapes, and I still have my VCR and VHS tapes, even though we are far beyond that at this point with Blu-rays and other things. But yeah, like, just being able to tell a couple of short stories that are somehow connected, and then having like an overarching plot that surrounds, those individual stories is pretty cool. So that is my number eight. And then I guess another reason why I gave it, this number eight among my lists would be, again, going to my stipulations about as a franchise. If the other installments weren't as good or as effective, I probably would have it falling far lower, and it probably wouldn't even make my top 10. But I challenge you, any other horror franchise out there, especially an anthology horror franchise. I feel like that's really difficult to do, as a franchise. And to have each of those installments have, memorable stories and work, as not only as an overarching franchise, that if you, had it in one sitting, you would be able to, notice some of the aesthetics that they kept, but also to be able to enjoy them, individually. there aren't, in my opinion, there aren't that many franchises out there that can do that effectively. I saw the recent one, and it makes me pretty excited for what they do next with the franchise, because instead of settling on doing a lot of what they did before of having it be a modern story, they journeyed back and tried to continue to play with that as a nostalgic aesthetic with VHS tapes, and they kind of gave it a 90s aesthetic, which is why you have that new title of VHS 94. So if you guys have never seen the film, I highly recommend it. There are a lot of awesome little short films that are a part of, or short stories that are a part of these films. Many that come, there are a lot that are in there, but I guess a couple that come to mind is maybe the initial one from this first film, where you have a situation where you have a bunch of friends where I guess they come from bar hopping or what have you, and they meet um, a couple of women, and they head back to their hotel room, and chaos ensues. Like it really goes in a completely different direction than where you expected, and it's pretty it's pretty astounding and like surprising, like which way it goes. And the second one, there's a short story, and I don't know if you've seen. Have you seen all the installments of
I've
this?
only seen the first one. Yeah.
Okay, so I won't go into spoil. I try to like tiptoe around spoilers to give you that opportunity, but I will recommend there is in the second film a story that deals with a guy on a bike using a GoPro, and there's one with a interesting community that is isolated upon itself. So those are two interesting ones. I won't get into the one for 94 since it's still very new, but I figure I could at least give at least a general synopsis of maybe some of the stories from two. But yes, number 8 is the horror film VHS. Now, are there any other thoughts before we hop into your number 7, Josh?
Yeah, I like the first VHS. Like I said, I haven't seen the other ones, but it kind of made me sort of think of a horror film version of the old Firesign Theater group. Which, for those of you who don't know what that is, Firesign Theater was a comedy trope from the early 1970s, that they would come up with all these skits, and somehow the skits would all intertwine into one big joke. And VHS is sort of like that, but obviously it's horror based, so they all kind of come back to this one thing each time. So it's really quite fascinating. You like to see where it's going. It all seems kind of random, but it really isn't. There is something going on here, a much bigger scary thing going on.
Cool beans. So you're up at bat again, number 7.
Okay, number 7, a very new and very popular film, Get Out, directed by, of course, Jordan Peele, and starring Daniel Kaluuya, Allison Williams, Bradley Whitfield, Caleb Laundrie Jones, Stephen Root, and Catherine Keener. This kind of is, I really love this movie. Basic premise of it is an African-American photo artist goes with his white girlfriend up to her family's house in Connecticut for a weekend, and they seem a little bit overly nice, somewhat annoying, but as we go on, we find out that the family kind of has ulterior motives for the artist. There is kind of a Frankenstein theme here, that basically the family is, well, the father and his son are neuroscientists, and they have discovered this method to insert human consciousnesses into other human beings.
I will pause you really quick before you get into that. Let me put a disclaimer, guys, of spoilers. I
Oh
forgot I
yeah,
didn't get into that, but yes, let me put that up here, really quickly.
sorry everybody.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I should have prerequisite with that, but yes, go ahead, continue.
Yeah, and essentially they can, but obviously the process doesn't work because at one point, uh, when Daniel is talking to another African American person who apparently is a local of this area, this gentleman suddenly has some sort of seizure and he starts telling him to get out. And it's a very disturbing film, um, because one of the things it frightens me is just the dehumanizing of other people. For one, stealing identity, literally just stealing that which is sacred to all of us, our personalities, our bodies, everything, and this sense of exploitation. It's very horrifying. I mean, this is not a gory horror film in any way, shape, or form. It's not a supernatural kind of film, but it is very scary, to say the least. Um, but just to get into an idea I have, and I'll probably get into this again. A lot of our mutual friends like this movie, but they don't really like horror films, and I think it's because I think everybody is sort of a closeted horror movie fan. It's just sometimes they just don't like a lot of things that go on in horror films. I don't mean just like the blood and the gore. I mean like they don't like guys like Freddy and Jason,
Right,
but they
right.
like this because it's also very thought provoking, and it really is. Jordan Peele is a genius in my opinion, and I'm not just saying that. He is brilliant, and he makes a really great movie. He's made a lot of really good projects over the years since leaving the Keel and Peele show, which I enjoyed that as well. But you know,
And
I
he's
find
also
his
a
horror
Mad TV
movies.
alum. A lot of people forget that, but he's a Mad TV alum as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, he is. He is a man of all trades. Well, I think honestly, you know, there's something about horror and comedy, and certainly we discussed this a little bit with Scream, that they seem to go well together. I think it's because I think the same parts of the brain are sort of stimulated by both humor and horror at the same time, and it works. There are some humorous moments in Get Out, but it is a very scary, disturbing film, and I really it's amazing. Uh, what are your
No, I
thoughts
hear
on
you.
it?
I hear you. I mean, I've seen it. It is, a terrific film. I guess the only reason why, and maybe, as the time passes by, like it will end up in my top 10. The only reason why it hasn't is, I guess, as a level, it's like, okay, like I get all of that, and I live that every day. Like a lot of those things, I'm like, yep, I get that, I understand that element. So I guess more so with something that I know it's listed as a horror film. When I think of how the film plays out and the way it's structured, and I know tomato in terms of like how you distinguish it or describe it. I think of it more so of as a thriller than I do as a horror film.
Mhm.
And so like that's the only reason why, another reason aside from the point that I gave before, another reason why I don't have it in my top 10 is that, and I'm thinking explicitly as a horror film, I'm thinking of it more as like a psychological thriller, in terms of like how the story plays out and what it talks about and what it entails. And I know, there are a lot of folks out there where they'll say, no, that's a horror film, or they'll, a lot of times it kind of gets, in terms of those terms that people use for horror or thriller, it's interchangeable for a lot of people, but for me, it's very distinctly different. of having, what you have in horror films versus what you have in thrillers. And don't get me wrong, thrillers can be, suspenseful and, put you on the edge of your seat. But still, at the end of the day, that's how I delineate it as a film. I love it as a film. It's just that I don't explicitly uh, categorize it, at least for me, subjectively, as a horror film. I picture it more as a thriller.
Yeah.
Only reason why I don't have it in there. But no, that's a terrific choice. All right, so going into my number 7, I'm going to journey back a bit and go to the film 13 Ghosts. You're probably thinking about, oh, you mean the 13 Ghosts with Matt Lillard? No, the one way back in way back in 1960. I apologize for saying way back. I know there's some folks that will be watching that were around in that decade. But yes, 1960s 13 Ghosts basically followed a family that inherited what ended up being a haunted house, and using a special pair of goggles, they were able to see a lot of these ghosts that were inhabiting the house. So, like, speaking of, I know we were talking a little way just recently about that nostalgic element of having VHS tapes. So I gotta look for it, mind you, but I actually had this movie on VHS, like the old 1960 film on VHS, and I used to watch it all the time. And the reason being is that even though it's a film that has arrived and came out decades ago, it still works as a horror film, and it still works as a film that has a lot of those tropes that you see in horror films, like those jump moments that catch you off guard. And that's quite a bit to say. If that movie came, well, I should say, yeah, that movie came out, what, let's see, 40, 60, 61 years ago.
Yeah.
61 years ago, guys, and it still works in terms of how the story plays out, and a lot of those elements that you come to expect from your horror films. And to be able to have that type of longevity and still work, it's not in color, it's in black and white. It has still has elements, as I said, in it that allow it to work with suspenseful moments and jump moments that we see a lot of times in even our modern horror films. A lot of it can be likely thanks to this film and many of the hallmarks and the foundation that it set, and inspiring films down the line. It still works, and it's been out forever. Like, it's, as I said, 60 plus years, and we're still talking about it now. So that's really saying something. Josh, have you seen the original 13 Ghosts?
I saw it a long time ago, but you're right. It is a classic film. This was, of course, probably, I think, one of William Castle's best well-known films. You mentioned about they were only able to see the ghost by wearing special glasses. Well, when that movie came out, audiences were given special glasses.
That's right.
That's certain times they'd be able to see the ghosts, which I think you could actually see them with or without the glasses. But it was a publicity thing. Castle was known for doing gimmicks like that. One of his other movies, he said that if anybody died during the movie because it was so scary, the studio would pay for that person's funeral. I don't think anybody did die. But another thing I like about this movie is the story idea. Whenever I've tried to write a haunted house story, one of the things I run into is, okay, how do I keep these people from escaping the haunted house when they find out, okay, this is actually a haunted house. And that is, he comes up with the idea of, okay, there's all this money there, and this family really needs the money. So they stay there trying to find this hidden fortune. But at the same time, they have to contend with some very malevolent ghosts. who don't want them in that house. So it's I
Right.
think it is a terrific film. I think it really was. I don't think much of the remake, but I do enjoy the original. That's a really fun, classic, really well done horror film. So good choice there.
All right, cool. You're up once again. Go for it.
Okay, so for number 6, I have the 2018 horror film Hereditary, directed by Ari Aster, starring the great Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, Millie Safro, and Gabriel Byrne. The basic premise of the film, and there's some spoilers here. Like
Hey, one sec,
13
let me
Ghosts.
put it up.
Sorry, put the spoilers up. Yeah,
All right,
please.
go ahead.
Thank you. As with 13 Ghosts, you have this family that inherits a home that they move into, partially because they need to consolidate expenses, but also because Toni Collette's mother in this film dies, and the film goes on because it is kind of a slow burn the first half hour or so. She starts meeting all these people who knew her mother, and she and her mother had a very strained relationship. They apparently fought a lot, and Colette's character is burdened with this whole idea of like all these things she wished she could have done, these things she wished she could have said to her mother, and never got the chance. And she is also trying to raise her 2 kids. She's not a single mom. Gabriel Byrne plays her husband, but she has a son that, he has some behavioral problems, and her daughter seems somewhat withdrawn. Then one night, the son, he decides he wants to go to this party with his new high school buddies, and for some reason, Toni Collette makes him take his sister with him, and it turns out that his sister has a peanut allergy, and when she accidentally eats a peanut, he has to try to rush her to the hospital, but she dies along the way. And of course, this erupts into a lot of anger in the family, a lot of frustrations, and as the movie progresses, Colette begins to find out that her mother was part of some sort of cult or coven that worshipped a demon. And we begin to find out that other things, like she didn't initially want to be a mother. It really becomes a very disturbing visual film. And I mean, it just really pushes. I mean, there's gore, but it's well used kind of gore. I like to say that it's not just random slaughter and things. It's just very well done. Because like I said, the first 30 minutes or so are a little bit of a slow burn. But also another thing I like about it is, like Psycho, you think it's going to be one thing and then it's something else. At first, you think it's going to be a standard possession film that maybe the little girl is going to get possessed by the demon, maybe the mom is, and that's not what happens. Let me
pause you really quick.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna take down the spoiler if you're good to go, because I just want to make sure we're good.
Okay. I don't want to give away anything because I do want people to go to watch this movie. It's available on Prime, but it does go in a different direction than I think most people are expecting it to. Toni Collette is amazing, has his Gabriel Byrne. Those are 2 actors. I think you could put them in most anything and they would make the movie exciting. Like I said, I think I'm going to end up rewatching it again very soon myself. What are your thoughts on the movie?
Well, here's the thing, and it's fine. It's okay because I still want to see it based off of what people have said about it. Is just for the sake of how it's executed, I'm intrigued in seeing the film itself. I've yet to see it. It's okay that I've been spoiled. It's fine. But but I still plan on checking it out because I've heard from all of my friends that are fellow horror buffs. They always say you have to see this, you have to see this, you have to see this. So um, again, I will put it on my watch list for this weekend. I'll have a little time this weekend, and I will put it on the watch list to check out for sure because it's
Yeah.
always a recommend among other fellow horror buff friends. So, all right. So for my number six is a film that goes by the name Event Horizon.
Ooh.
So yes, Event Horizon. If you guys are not familiar, with that film, it was a film directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. And if I'm just without going into details about like the overall plot, because I want to give people the opportunity to kind of see how it unfolds, without getting into a lot of the plot details. The best way to think about it is, instead of having a ghost story that's happening in, a haunted house, in this feature, you have essentially a haunted spaceship. So this ship has actually been been missing for quite a long time, and when it's discovered again, a crew goes into the ship and tries to find out where it's been. And again, I'm not going to go into details about where to reveal or what's revealed about where it's been. I'll let you guys discover that on your own. But all the mayhem that ensues is like, astonishing. The gore in it, like if you're a gore hound, you'll be perfectly. I mean, I like gore in my films, but man, like it's a lot of gore, in this film. So much so that this film, which released out in 1997, so gosh, it's been what? It's that 24 years ago. You know, that it thinking of like how gory it was because I actually have it on DVD. They really had to, believe it or not, they actually have a cut that still hasn't seen the light of day, like an unrated cut
Mm-hmm.
that they were in danger of actually getting, an NC-17 rating for a horror film
Ooh.
because it was just that gory. And if you guys are not aware, there's one I won't get into spoilers. I'll try to tiptoe around it, but there is one scene in there that I'll tell you that involves the prior crew that was on the ship and what happens to them, what's revealed about what happens to them. That sequence alone caused them to really get in trouble with the ratings system and trying to like cut it down so that way they could just barely make an R rating. So among Paul W.S. Anderson films, like, if you guys aren't familiar with Paul W.S. Anderson, he's a filmmaker who has also did the original. And I say original because we have a reboot of sorts coming out now. He did the original what is it, Resident Evil franchise. He also did
Yeah.
the only decent Mortal Kombat movie. I won't say the only decent. He did the first Mortal Kombat movie, which is my favorite. The reboot was okay. It was okay. I know there's some naysayers or some folks that said that it was like the best thing since sliced bread. I fall somewhere in the middle. There were some things that I liked about it. There were some things that I thought could have been done better, but I'm aware based on the circumstances and everything that went into making the film, the resources available, all those types of things that is the product of all of those circumstances or challenges that it had to deal with in having the film made. But I would still say among those Mortal Kombat installments, his is the best one. out of his filmography, I would say Mortal Kombat and this film are among my favorite films that he's ever put together. It has an incredible cast, like ensemble. You talk about ensembles with horror films. We're thinking of like Alien, and we're thinking of The Thing, and how impressive and how effective those ensembles work together. You have Lawrence Fishburne, you have Sam Neill, you have Richard T. Jones, you have Jason Isaacs, Sean Pertwee. Like that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like there are so many incredible, Jolie Richardson, excuse me. Like there's so many incredible, folks that are a part of this ensemble. So like I believe you've seen it as well, Josh. What are your thoughts on this film?
I love this movie. It is the first time I saw it, I was still working in a movie theater, and so we were screening the film. From the ads I had seen, I thought it was going to be just another standard alien attack spaceship thing, and crew makes a lot of bad decisions, and it is not that at all. I will say that I was actually pretty freaked out for a couple of days after seeing it. It was that scary. I couldn't sleep. I was just really shaken by it. Sam Neill is a great horror movie actor. He's a great actor in general, but there's something about him in a horror movie that he's so good. I don't know if it's just his facial expressions or whatever, but he is really, really good in this.
I think I know. I think I can kind of surmise like what you mean. I feel like he plays someone who can be very vulnerable, but he can also play very intimidating. So like he can have kind of that devious, very malicious quality to him.
Mhm.
But in the other respect, when something is being done to him, you buy it, and it's you really relate to whatever the experience that character is going through when he's
Yeah.
portraying a character who is being dealing with a creature, or having being vulnerable in terms of what's being inflicted upon him as a character.
Yeah. And I mean, he was, looking back at his own filmography, he was probably the ideal person to play the grown-up version of Damien in The Omen 3.
We will get to that. Yep.
Yeah. And the architecture of the set of the spaceship is so gothic and frightening.
And religious, and trying to make it in that, and it wasn't by mistake that it looked like a cross, like in terms of what they did with the
Right.
ship.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very creepy. You do feel very scared. And again, going back to the idea of the haunted house. I mean, you have a haunted house in inner space, like you said, and unlike most haunted houses, this is not something you can easily leave because you're in space. And
Exactly.
yeah, it just a terrific, terrific film. I can't recommend it enough. I meant to put it on my list, but I just didn't. But I'm glad you did, so we could talk about it here. Everyone should really see this. I did not know though about the extended cut, and that it almost went to NC-17. I'm like, ooh, what did they cut out? I have to see this
I
now.
will tell you the scene offline, if you recall some of the moments from that film. But yeah,
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we talk about that again later.
Okay, cool. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, like I would say whenever this film is on TV, like it doesn't matter what part, of the film that it's in, how far into the film, I always enjoy like watching it all the way through, because like it just unravels and unravels and unravels, like in terms of where the story starts and where it ends up,
Yeah.
like where the characters start off and where many of the characters end up and what their fate is. Man, it's quite a journey. That's all I'll say.
Yes.
But looks like we are on the second half of our list. So we're
Yes.
up at 5. Go ahead.
Okay, for number 5, I have chosen The Body of Jane Doe, The Autopsy of Jane Doe, 2016 film starring Emile Hirsch and Brian Cox, directed by Andre Overdahl. I don't want to get into spoilers here. I will just kind of give you the first part of it. What happens is in a small Virginia town, somewhere south of Richmond, I think, police officers discover an entire family has been brutally murdered. But then they discover another body of an unknown subject who apparently was partially buried in the basement of their house. And they cannot determine a cause of death because the body looks nearly pristine. So they take the body to the local mortician, who is also the county coroner, to do a medical autopsy. The county coroner is played by the great Brian Cox. And he kind of runs this father-son mortuary business with his son, who's played by Emile Hirsch. And they have this great repertoire between them, where you really could believe they are a devoted father and son. It's just them. We know that the mother apparently passed away some time ago, and they're very close with each other. But as they examine this body, they cannot find any reason why this woman is dead, because there's no sign of injury, no nothing. She should honestly look like she should be able to get off that autopsy table and walk away. And as they continue to examine her, everything starts to become more horrifying, more frightening. It just gets, they know something is wrong here. And before they know it, they cannot escape. So I do not want to go into more spoilers. This movie is amazing. It is one of the scariest things I've ever seen. I've actually heard of couples breaking up over this movie because one of them was so scared and so mad at the other person for making them watch it. It was that scary. Brandon, have
Wow.
you had a chance to see it?
I have not. And again, these are one of those films that is always on the list that, people always recommend, friends recommend
Yeah.
me to check out and see. So again, my list is growing. That will be another film that I will add to the docket for sure,
Yes.
because it's definitely a film, I see it promoted all the time and I always see clips of it whether it's on demand or on, any, any premium platform of something that's available, and I will for sure check it out, because it is always been on my list. It's just a matter of getting around to it, so now I do have the time to do that. All right, so my number 5 we actually already talked about at this point a little earlier in the show, and that is Psycho is my number 5.
Oh, okay.
Psycho is my number 5, and it would have been higher on the list, but the only reason why it's not is because of all those different elements that were done with the story later on. We had the remake that came out, we had the TV show, and I feel like which is actually an issue that I have with another franchise is the Alien franchise, but
Yeah.
I'll hold off on that on as to why, but you'll probably surmise by what I'm about to say. Is just that idea of if you reveal too much about your monster, it stops being scary. And so like if you get in too deep into its origins, talking about our character, our main guy in Psycho, going into his background and his interactions with his mom, sometimes it's better just to have it in your head of how that is, versus having it explicitly explained for you or shown for you. And so after seeing that series, and don't get me wrong, it's a great series, it's just that with all the different things, mediums that are out there that have done this story and have, expanded that story. And also the fact that, it's so, I feel like it's so iconic that, it's lost. It's, if it makes any sense, it's lost. I feel some of that element of mystery of those scenes, and being able to be surprised by those scenes, because it is so inundated into, I feel like, our psyche of what we've seen, whether you like horror movies or not. It's such an iconic moment in cinema history that I feel that, even though it is on my list and it needs to be on the list in terms of, the influences that it has had for filmmakers down the line. And I mentioned it before with Scream, of, having it be unheard of killing off, one of your stars so early in the film, and really, giving that idea of like all bets are off, like no one is really safe in a project like that, or say in a story like that, is still effective. So it paved the way for a lot of films that were to follow it, that we all enjoy. Yet at the same time, because it's such a film that is so iconic, and it's so ingrained into like our consciousness as moviegoers, regardless of whether you enjoy the genre or not. I feel it takes a little bit away from it, from being in my top three as horror films. But what are your thoughts? I know I second pretty much everything that you said before, which is why I'm not going to get into even more details about what you've already explained that I agree with Psycho.
Yeah. Two things. Going back to Robert Bloch, who wrote the original novel, he did not know very much about Ed Gein. He'd only heard that story, the news report. Years later, he had read some accounts of Ed Gein, and he was actually surprised how much he had gotten correct, like the relationship between Norman and his mother, and how similar it was to Gein and his mother. But the other thing I want to bring up is, I have never been able to finish watching The Bates Motel. It's not because I don't enjoy the show. It's a very well done show. It's just, I keep feeling sorry for Norman. I just want to hug this guy and tell him it's okay. He doesn't have to become a serial killer. It's gonna be fine, buddy. We can work this out. But he's such a tortured guy, and I feel such sympathy for him. That's made it. I know he grows up to do these horrible things, but at this point, he's just this guy. And
And see, that's my very thing. Like, it's nothing against like the show and how effective the actors in the show portray their roles.
Yeah.
It's just that idea of, you create this monster, and by making them empathetic, like empathizing with their plight, and how they were brought up, I feel takes a bit of the sting away from being able to fear them as as characters. So it's far more interesting to not know a whole bunch about your monster, because your imagination does so much of it. So if we're revealing more and more things, and empathizing with them, at some point we're not even going to picture him as the iconic antagonist that we've grown to really fear in the original film.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things I like in certain horror films that I find scary sometimes, is when you make the story about you make the characters like, okay, these are people, when the victims don't deserve this. That makes it more scarier. And certainly, again, Norman, I don't think deserves to become a monster, but he gets made into one by his mother and by the abuse he suffers, and that's part of the tragedy. But it is, it's iconic, and he is an iconic character in both the films and the television show. I'm gonna have to give watching the show another go, because I've heard nothing but good things about it over the years, and I do want to watch. I do want to finish watching it at some point. So
Cool, man. Number 4.
Okay, number 4. the original 1978 Halloween, directed by John Carpenter, and of course starring the magnificent Jamie Lee Curtis and the amazing Donald Pleasance. Quick rundown: the movie opens with a young woman being murdered in her home, and we find out that it is her 6-year-old brother who actually kills her. After that, the brother is then confined to a mental asylum for several years until finally he escapes and is then pursued by his psychiatrist, played by Donald Pleasance. This young boy, whose name is, of course, Michael Myers, returns to his hometown of Haddonfield, Illinois, to begin killing again. And one of the people he is trying to kill is a young babysitter named Lindsay, played by Jamie Lee Curtis, who has... The film goes on. She sees each one of her friends is brutally murdered, and she is fighting to protect the 2 children that are in her charge. I love this movie. It is the first... I mean, you can argue that Psycho may be the first slasher film, but no, this one is the first straight up one. It is scary. It is unpredictable. No one had ever seen anything quite like this. And, you know, it's become part of our cultural lexicon, even with the new movies. Michael is a very scary guy, or has John Carpenter actually referred to him as the Shape. I mean, it's just, people just call him Michael Myers, but if you look at the credits, he's referred to as the Shape, because he's the sum of violence. It's interesting. Originally, Halloween was not going to be a series of movies about Michael Myers. It was actually Carpenter's original vision for Halloween was it was going to be a series of films that would come out every Halloween, and it would be a different horror film each time. But the thing was, the first movie was such a hit, and the studio said, no, we want another movie about this Michael Myers guy. So he wrote the sequel, Halloween 2, which is another movie I really liked. But he had basically said, okay, the next movie is going to be something else I want to make, but it's going to be still Halloween. They were like, okay. So, of course, that's how we got Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, which was a completely different story that threw a lot of people. And so that movie's only just now gotten the love it actually deserves, because it is a terrific horror film. But then all the other ones that came after it were all Michael Myers movies. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on Halloween, Brandon?
So with Halloween, I enjoy the Halloween franchise, but at the same time, this is one of the franchises again, and talking about how many installments that it has, and now that we don't even have the regular franchise now, we have a requel. And for those of you that are not familiar with the term, that's basically when Hollywood decides that they want to ignore certain installments and then pick up a story at a certain point and then start another franchise. So in essence, kind of doing a reboot, but not really, because you're continuing the story at some, specified point. So like with this recent set of films where the movie that they made before, not the one that just recently came out, is supposed to act as a sequel to the original film and basically ignores all the other installments that came, in between then. This is another example of a film that would be on my list had it not been for all the installments that preceded it.
Yeah.
I enjoy the first film, and again, like, it would be such a terrific, entry in this top 10 if it was just that film, because like there aren't a whole bunch, and because I feel like as the installments continued, it kind of got silly. Like, another reason why I'm thinking that is because I'm thinking of like the Busta Rhymes, like, what is it, H2O, that had like Busta Rhymes, and it had like Josh Hartnett and like all these other like well-known actors in it, and like it was kind of like comical really and not really scary.
Yeah.
So like yeah, when I'm thinking of that, for whatever reason, my mind immediately goes there. I don't know. Maybe it's just by virtue of where I was at that time. I think at that time I want to say it was high school when that film came out. I want to say it came out in. I'll look it up to confirm, but yeah, like whatever outside of that original film, even though they've had quite a bit of installments, my head automatically goes to the what is it? It goes to H2O, but it also goes to one of the installments that came before that starred what is his name? Ant-Man, because he
Paul
was in
Rudd.
Paul Rudd, where like before he started doing a lot of like comedies, like he actually had like he was in one of the installments, and it was like it wasn't like a comedic role, it was like a deadpan, it was a serious role, in one of those installments. So those are the immediate installments that come to mind. Haven't seen the sequel, but I did see the one prior, that initial requel sequel, if you will. And I mean, like I love the original one, and I highly respect that film as an effective horror film, and obviously a great Halloween film to watch. But based on the prerequisites that I was touching on at the top, because of all of those other installments, it kind of threw it out of the top 10 for me.
Yeah. I just want to add a couple of things here about the franchise as a whole. I love the sequel. I love the whole revelation that, Laurie is Jamie Lee Curtis's character is Michael Myers' little sister. Because it does add this disturbing element that you don't get with either Freddy or Jason, and that is Michael Myers needs to destroy his family and everyone around them. Because that's just what he does. He's this creature that I kind of think of as an anti-life, that he despises life. But I'm also kind of a rare creature in the sense that I like the first two movies. I'm not as crazy about a lot of the sequels, but I did like the first Rob Zombie Halloween because Michael becomes more of a person. We see things from his perspective. We he's a real person, that he's this person that like Norman Bates suffered these awful traumas and he became a monster, and that makes him scarier. So, honestly, if I could have directed my own requel, I think I would have used the Michael Myers of the Rob Zombie movie, but I would have kept the Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Laurie. I would have kept her from the original films because she is a strong, heroic female presence that I really love. And but yeah, I see what you're saying, because I mean, it's almost like there's a multiverse of Michael Myers stuff. You've got
You get
the
three. You just named a
original,
whole other separate franchise of
yeah, the
Halloween.
H2O
Case in
stuff,
point.
the Rob Zombie stuff, the requel stuff. And I'm worried that in this next third Halloween movie, they're going to unlock something, and all of the Michael Myerses are going to, have this kind of multiverse moment where they meet each other and the whole universe collapses.
There you go, movie idea.
There you
They'll
go.
probably
Hey,
do
there
that.
you go. That might be what they're going to do.
Man, oh man. All right. So my number 4,
Yeah.
for those of you that are curious, is none other than, again, another anthology, Creep Show.
Oh, love that movie.
Okay. All right. So Creep Show. Again, like I said, another anthology film. Don't need to really get into all the specifics of the individual short films or short stories themselves, but the thing that I like about it is, going along with those prerequisites that I was talking about, is in terms of the style, it had a cool style in terms of that comic book type of
Yeah.
aesthetic that it utilizes in doing its transitions from story to story to story. So it feels like you're actually just reading a live like comic book as each of these stories progress. And then even beyond that, like even though this film came out in 1982, so it's older than me, but the thing is, like, it still holds up as as an effective horror anthology. Like a lot of those stories are very effective. They're scary, they're suspenseful. And I'm just thinking of like just offhand, like some of the stories that they had. They had one regarding like a creature in a box that I remember, vividly. There was, and then maybe they've had other installments too that have been very, effective. I remember like in the second installment, they had one that dealt with, and I don't know if you've seen any of the sequels, Josh, but
Yeah, I saw the second movie. Yes.
they have one where they have like this ooze that's in like a lake that was really effective.
Yeah.
That I recall from in the second picture. So yeah, I mean they have like such such a eclectic cast of ensemble that they've had with those stories. So let me just go down like the list in terms of like the pedigree that you're dealing with here. So it came out in 1982. It's directed by George A. Romero. Godfather, or the one of the forefathers of our zombie films, of that whole subgenre that you have with horror. And I mean, it was written, by Stephen King, and it has, as I said, an impressive cast. Like it includes the likes of Leslie Nielsen. It includes Hal Holbrook, Adrian Barbeau. Like I could just go down a list where you just have name after name of
Ted
these
Danson.
incredible. Yeah, Ted Danson too,
Mm-hmm.
and that story, that story of what transpires with his significant other in that story. I
Yeah.
recall that one as well. So yeah, like I can't say enough, about this film in terms of, as I said, that comic book aesthetic that it uses to tell its story. It has each of those short stories, but it always has this really unique like comic book aesthetic to provide a transition from story to story to story. And additionally, the cast that they had utilized for each of those stories, and that it still works, to this day. Each of those stories are still, suspenseful and, fun, even now, even though that it came out in 82 and we're here now in 2021. So,
Yeah.
Josh, your thoughts?
Well, I would have to say that this is the second great comic book movie of its time, because you had Superman that came out a couple years before. Then you had Creepshow, which is based off the EC Comics stories. I think my favorite one from this movie was the one called, I think it was called Father's Day, in which this woman goes to visit her dead father's grave, and apparently there was a lot of bad things that happened, and the father comes up out of the ground, and it's pretty gory. It's really fun though. Even Stephen King does his first real acting gig in this movie.
Yeah.
The story about the meteor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I love that one, and he actually was pretty good. I think he was really quite good with the character he was playing, even though it was somewhat campy. He does a good job with it. It is a fun horror film to watch. It is a lot of fun, and I would highly recommend anybody just watching it on a Saturday night. I will say that I have tried watching the Shudder version, the Shudder, the horror streaming service.
Yeah,
They
of
made
course. Yeah.
they made it was okay. It was okay. There were a few episodes that I thought were pretty good, but overall, I could only say it was okay. So, but yeah, the original movie's far better. So
Yeah, definitely. And I would say it's one of the few films that I can think of that, in thinking of, and I've mentioned this before, not necessarily with this show that we're doing now, but in other shows that we've had here on Movers, is just that idea that you have a film that or an IP that is a testament to the era that it was released. And as I said, it came out in 1982. If you look at it, you can see all of those sensibilities of the 80s and how people dress and all of those things. And on top of the fact, not only does it work as a horror film, but it allows you to have that nostalgic aspect of the decade that it was made too. So, and I'll get into that with some of the other films that I have yet to, touch on. But I wanted to comment on that on that too, because that is a unique thing to be able to do. Not only can it, take you back in time to that decade of when those stories are taking place, but it also works as a film within its genre.
Yeah, it's great. It's a classic. Yeah.
All right, you are up at number 3.
Number 3, okay. Number 3 is 1991's Silence of the Lambs. Starring, directed by Jonathan Demme, and of course starring, based off a novel by Thomas Harris of the same name, and of course starring Jodie Foster, Ted Levine, and Sir Anthony Hopkins. The basic premise of the film is Jodie Foster plays FBI cadet Clarice Starling, who has been recruited by the head of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to go to the Baltimore Psychiatric Hospital to interview Dr. Hannibal Lecter, who is a serial killer. He's known as Hannibal the Cannibal, and they are hoping that he can give them some insights into a serial killer that they are tracking, known only as Buffalo Bob, who is apparently abducting young women and then leaving their bodies in the along the Ohio River. As the movie progresses, we begin to find out that Buffalo Bob, in fact, was a former patient of Lecter's, and that.
And before you continue, I'm going to put the disclaimer on here.
Oh yeah, put the disclaimer up. Yeah. Okay.
1 sec.
Okay. Lecter agrees to help Clarice find Buffalo Bob, but it's all a ruse as part of his plans to escape custody. Meanwhile, Clarice, using what she's learning from Lecter, begins to track down Buffalo Bob and finds out that apparently Bob's motivation is basically he's abducting these women in attempts to try to make himself a woman's suit to establish a female identity. In the end, of course, she confronts Buffalo Bob in his lair and kills him, but Hannibal Lecter has escaped. Couple of things I want to bring up here. As with Psycho, this movie, the story behind this movie is based loosely off of the murders of Ed Gein, who himself was also trying to establish a female identity. In that case, he wanted to become his mother. Ted Levine, of course, plays Buffalo Bob, and also Lecter is somewhat loosely based off of Ted Bundy, who also escaped capture a couple of times. The reason I consider this a horror film, most people think of it as a thriller, is something that the writer Kim Newman said, is that if you go back and you look at the movie Manhunter, which is also another film that features Hannibal Lecter, in that movie, Lecter, who's played by Brian Cox, actually, is confined in a secured hospital room. It doesn't look anything like the iconic cell we know from the Silence of the Lambs movies. In Silence of the Lambs, Lecter is in a medieval dungeon where we hear the shouts and cries of the other patients, and there's water dripping off the walls. It looks like a dungeon, that's a horror movie that helps make it. And also you have a tremendous lot of jump scares throughout the second half of the film, like when Lecter escapes, and also when Clarice is trying to is facing off with Bob in his basement, and he's turned out the lights and he's tracking her with these infrared goggles that he's wearing. It is creepy. You're first time I saw it in a movie theater, my hands were gripping the armrest. I was so tense. I was like, oh my god, oh my god. And it's a wonderful, scary film. Anthony Hopkins, just creates such a monster in Dr. Lecter, and just lives up to the name Hannibal the Cannibal. It's absolutely brilliant. Brandon, what are your thoughts on it?
Absolutely. So, similar, I think we had talked about this a little earlier in talking about like the film as a genre, and you're absolutely right. There are some elements of it that are very unnerving and very creepy. And I do recall, I remember watching it, as a kid, and I was watching, with some family members, and didn't know what it was until we had already kind of gotten into it. And I do remember, how like I think one of the things that I vividly remember is his, is Lecter's escape, and the manner in which he escapes and what he does to those that are at the facility, like how he gets how he let's just say how he takes care of those that are keeping him captive in that facility. Yeah. That's all I'll say. I'll leave it up to you guys to be surprised on how he does that, but the manner in which he does it was quite surprising and quite unexpected, to be sure. And this one was hard, like to be able to put it in my top 10. Like, it just fell short of it, just because of, again, that similar thing of the other installment. Like, yeah, the other one was okay, but like I hold the original one in a higher regard as that. And if I'm averaging it out, maybe if there were other installments that kind of helped with that taste in my mouth that it left with the second film, I would feel differently about it. But because of the what you had with the the iconic first film, and then what we have with the second film, like it just fell short of making my top 10. But no, like, you're right, like a lot of those scenes are very creepy and very unnerving, to be sure.
Just one last thing I wanted to add. Well, a couple things. One is, like Get Out, this is one of these films I think that goes back to my theory that everybody's a horror movie fan to a certain extent. Obviously, Lecter is not like Freddy or Jason. He's far scarier. I mean, in my opinion, he does stuff that's every bit as horrible as what you've seen in a Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And he is really, like when he does what he does. I don't want to go into that. But it is, he's just as scary, but it's because he doesn't have these wacky one-liners. He's just scary. He's just horror. He's just really scary. The other thing is, I want to ask you before we move on, what did you think of the Hannibal TV series? Did you ever?
No. I know what you're talking about, and that's the thing. Maybe and that's my fault that I have not watched the series, and I've heard great things about it. Perhaps by watching the series, that would change my mind. As an overall IP of Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal Lecter and that character, I would feel differently. I hear a lot of great things about it, and I mean, now that it's off now, so like I can actually catch up and binge watch it. So, that, that's definitely something that is on my queue to look out for, or I should say to check out. And watching that may very well, change, how I feel about, that character and what they've done with that, the lore or that universe, so to speak.
Yeah. Definitely is worth it. So what is your number 3?
All right, so my number 3, guys, is none other than not the remake, but the original Fright Night. All
Ooh.
right, so yet another film from the 80s, and just to give you just a quick rundown of like the plot, of this film, and then I'll get into, my reasons why it is my top 3. Basically, have a teenager. He discovers that a newcomer who comes into his neighborhood is a vampire, and so he turns to this guy that he knows from TV that battles vampires. He tried to enlist his help to help take care of this neighbor that is not only a danger to himself but also to everyone else in his household, his mother, his girlfriend, his best friend, what have you. It was directed by Tom Holland, and it arrived in theaters in 1985. Man, like, I don't know what I can say about this film. There's so many quotable lines. There's parts of it that are funny, and even in the humor that you have in the film, there's still suspenseful parts of it, and that's a rare thing to say when you have a horror film that can have comedic moments in it and still yet, despite that, not have it supersede like the horror or the suspenseful aspects. Chris Sarandon as Jerry the Vampire, it was such a iconic role. There's other iconic moments that I could think of like the dance that Jerry has with our main character's girlfriend. In that scene, and how iconic that moment is, and even like just the moment of just spelling out the name or saying out the name of your film. Welcome to Fright Night, for real. Like, or even the moment of where we have of the final showdown of one of those tropes that you have with vampires of lifting up out of your coffin. Like, there were so many things that I could just think of with that film. As I said, it was directed by Tom Holland. It starred an incredible cast that we have Chris Sarandon. It starts with Chris Sarandon. We have William Ragsdale, who went on to do other things with TV and even in film. We have the late Roddy McDowall, and we also have Amanda Burse as well. So if you recall Amanda Burse, she would go on to do Married with Children, but man, like, so many iconic moments, so many things that I can repeat, from the that film, that are quotable lines, and it holds a special place in my heart because it actually was a movie that my parents went to see, before they had me. So it was, it's something that, my mom shared with me, in discovering this film. It's like, oh, you need to check out this film. I remember seeing this, in the movies before you came along. But yeah, I think you'll like this one. Lo and behold, I liked it. So, despite the sentimental, value of, how it's connected on a family level with me, and then just thinking of how all those quotable moments and all those things that you have going with this film, the funny moments, the suspenseful moments, the scary moments. I mean, it's gory. Like, you basically check off a lot of the marks that you want to have in a horror film. So like, and then on top of that too, which I mentioned already, is that it is a capsule in time too. It really allows you to re-experience that decade of the 80s. But again, even despite the fact that it came out in 85, it still works. Still works as a horror film. It works as a vampire, horror film. If you're thinking of that, subgenre of horror with that type of monster. So I could go on and on, but I'll pass along to you, Josh, of talking about this original.
I love this movie too. It's one of my favorite vampire movies. I love Roddy McDowall is one of my favorite actors of all time. Planet of the Apes, this movie, so many other TV shows and movies he did. He has such an emotional range throughout the film. Of course, he's campy at different parts when he's playing the character. This guy, this television host who's hosting this horror TV show that shows old horror movies. And of course, he was at one point this famous actor who starred in a lot of those movies, but he, got typecast, or they only thought he was one guy, and he sort of got stuck with this thing, and he's really down on his luck. But he has, like I said, he at one point he's feeling very sorry for somebody. I don't want to give away anything. And then he has to muster up a lot of courage towards the end. He's so terrific in this film. And Christopher Sarandon, I think this must have been one of his first movies he did, because this was obviously pre Princess Bride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he is so good in this. I mean, he's a great vampire. You totally buy into the idea that he's a vampire, and because he's got that dark.
And here's the thing: he's scary, but at the same time, like, he's very charismatic. Like, he chews up a lot of the scenery. So
yeah. I mean, it's like Dracula. He's Dracula is scary, but he's also charismatic. He's the vampire you want to be. It's a terrific. It's such a terrific film. I'm glad you brought that one up. I'm gonna have to rewatch that. It's been a long, long time since I've seen it, and I think it's getting to the point where I need to go back and go watch it again. It's been too long.
And then I was gonna say, speaking further on that, that pedigree of who we had involved with that film. This is pre-Child's Play, guys. So you had Tom Holland and Chris Sarandon, working together again with that project. So just food for thought of that pedigree, and how sometimes in terms of those marriages that happen, so to speak, among creatives, whether they are actors, directors, or writers, that they work together again, and they produce some pretty awesome stuff when they do that. So yeah. All right, so go ahead, number 2.
Okay, number 2, the original 1974 movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by one of my all-time favorite horror movie directors, the great Tobe Hooper. Basic premise of the film: it opens with a cemetery that has been defiled. Apparently, a number of the bodies have been dug up and have been propped up onto their headstones. And then along comes this group of friends who seem to be driving through Texas, and they're stopping by the cemetery because because a couple of members of the group have family buried there, and they want to check on the graves. Then after they leave the cemetery, they're driving down this highway in Texas looking for someplace to get some gas, when they come across a hitchhiker who is, let's just say, he's not quite right in the head, and he ends up having some sort of manic episode where he attacks them. They shove him out of the van and they drive off. Then they finally come across this gas station not too far from these two people who had a family members in this graveyard. It's near their old homestead, and apparently the gas station is out of gas. Of course, it's the early 70s, so there were a lot of gas shortages back then. So they decide to go camp out at the old homestead. until the next day, and hopefully the gas station will then have gas then. But then trouble ensues when some members of the group decide to explore the woods nearby, and they come across this house, which seems to be running off of a generator. When they go to knock on the door of the house, they are then attacked by a large man wearing a mask that apparently we discover later is made of human flesh, and is chasing them with a chainsaw. This, of course, is our introduction to the character Leatherface. We find out that, well, I don't want to go into too many spoilers here, but it gets really horrifying. Once again, as with Psycho and Silence of the Lambs, this movie is, again, another thing based off of the career of Ed Gein. It is really disturbing, but it's interesting because you don't actually see a lot of blood in the movie, even though a lot of horrible things happen. And it is really scary. It's a very intense film. Brandon, what are your thoughts on it?
So I've had a chance to see this film, and my thing is this with this film, if it was just what we had, and mind you, I know sometimes you have to be able to separate the fact that it's that the story is redone, but at the same time, like the I enjoy the original, quite a bit, and I do like the aesthetic that they use in terms of how it's shot. It seems like it's happening, for real, versus something that's very stylized, and you have that suspension of disbelief. But at least in terms of how they shot, that film, there is a sense of realism and visceralness that it definitely gives off, that I in watching it, that I enjoyed a lot. But I guess the only thing that I have, going back to my prerequisites, is even though it didn't, even though it was redone as or remade, I should say, those films were, like, the first one was okay. It was the one starring, I want to say, Jennifer Beal,
Yeah.
that came out. And then beyond that, like, it just seemed like it was just like going off the rails in terms of what they were trying to do with that story. And in terms of what's closest in my mind, like, those are the ones that stick in my head the most when I thought of this film. And maybe that just means that I just need to do a rewatch of the original, because, like, I remember and seeing the original, like, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and maybe that will change my thoughts on it being among my top 10. It's definitely among my favorite horror movies, but just by virtue of what was done later with that IP, it kind of took it out of that top 10 for me. But again, every day is a constantly changing thing, and whenever we look back on these lists, we're like, why did I put it at that that number? It should be higher. As you continue to see more movies and get that time continues to pass on, just like you were saying with, I think you were talking about one of the films where it wasn't appreciated at the time. Not to say that I don't appreciate the original. It's just, as an overall package of that IP, those other additional films kind of ruined it for me. But again, it might just mean that it may just need a rewatch. The original may need a rewatch to change my mind.
Sadly, I mean, even though I like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3D because I thought that was the sequel I wish they would have made, and just everything, all the other movies in between the original and that one, I wish they would have just never happened. It really was a movie of diminishing returns, though. I mean, Toby Hopper did make a sequel in 1986, but it was nowhere near as profound as the first one. And then you had all the other ones. You had the one where Matthew McConaughey and Renee Zellweger.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah. A lot of people have weird careers that start in horror movies. I mean, they started in the 4th Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Jennifer Aniston
in Halloween. Kevin
Jennifer
Bacon.
Aniston, Leprechaun.
Yeah, on Friday the 13th. But there are some scenes in the second Michael Bay Chainsaw that I thought were pretty good, like about how Leatherface is born and stuff, and working in the slaughterhouse until, of course, it closes down. But going back to the original, I mean, that's a movie of its time. I mean, I mentioned the gas shortages, and you've got this scene right at the beginning after we see the bodies propped up on the gravestones, where this radio news reporter is talking about all these disasters that are going on. And you got to remember, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a movie that was made at a time when America felt very uncertain about itself, like now, where it's it's just after Vietnam, it's after Watergate has happened, everything is kind of unstable, and people are losing, America is changing, and it's like the Leatherface's family are trying to kind of save something, even though they're horrible people, they're psychopaths. But there's like this one scene when the victims are walking through the yard to the house, and you see this clock that's been nailed to a tree, as if someone's trying to stop time, almost. And when you've got the hitchhiker in the van with them, and he's talking about how his family worked in the meat packing industry, and how industrialization is bad, and how it was better when the animals were killed by actual human beings, that was better somehow. It's talking about a lot of these things that are kind of going on. And it, like I said, it is a movie of its time. I don't think they should try to make another remake, because obviously that really doesn't work. But it is a thought to film students who want to go into horror, is think about your time and your surroundings, draw on that. But it's like I said, it's a classic. It's one of my favorites. Visually, I think it still stands up. But you're right. I mean, the sequels are not anywhere near as good for this particular franchise. It makes you just wish they hadn't bothered. Just made the original one and done.
And one and done for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so my number 2 is none other than a completely eccentric but so weird, awesomely weird Extra. So just to give you a quick, synopsis of this film, and let me see if I can pull up the picture here for you guys. There we go. But yeah, it's a film that was released in 1982. And just to give you a quick synopsis, is you have this family. It opens on this family, and this guy, the father, gets abducted by aliens. It doesn't explicitly tell us that he's adopted by aliens. You guys are not explicitly adopted by aliens. One moment.
Brandon?
Sorry, you lost me for a moment, but no, you have the story of this family, and as I said, mentioned before, the father gets abducted by aliens. They don't explicitly say that, but in terms of how they execute it, that's the idea that we get. And years later, you're brought upon this family again. Now the mom is in a new relationship, but lo and behold, we have this moment where we're seeing that the father returns, and he returns in an unexpected guise. That's all I'll say. He returns in an unexpected guise, and in the manner, in order for him to be reborn as a, in the appearance of a human being, something pretty insane happens. I'll get into that, in a bit. Something pretty insane happens, and he, gets reunited with his family, and craziness ensues out of that reunion of him trying to, reestablish that relationship with his son and, with his family that he lost. Now, as I said, this is an awesomely weird horror film, just to give you an idea of some of the things that, transpire in this film. You have a woman who gives birth to a grown man, and he, births himself basically and bites off his own umbilical cord to be free of the lady who gives birth to him. You have that crazy moment in this film. You have another scene in which a kid, actually somehow magically has his toys come to life to wreak havoc on those that are in the vicinity. So, like, you have some pretty insane moments. I'm not going to name all of them. There's some random things that happen in this film. The reason why it's like my number two, not only is it gory, but it's just like so many WTF moments. Like, where did that come from? Like, where is that? Like, where is that coming from? In terms of how they, have it intertwined into the story. And I think, going back to what I was talking about before of that idea of mystery, I feel that it worked. The fact that you have those random things happen, I don't feel like it's random, but because some of it is not really explained on what those random moments are, it makes it that more effective and entertaining as a horror film. As I said, you're going to have gore for those that are the gore hounds, but like just on a lot of the random moments that you had, as I said, the pregnancy scene that they have in there, the scenes that they have with the kid, once he gets abilities. I'm not going to tell you how he gets his abilities. He doesn't start off that way, but once his dad comes back and returns into the picture, his dad, in a manner that I'm not going to get into or spoil, gives him abilities to, I guess you can kind of say, mess with elements of reality. It's not even explicitly said, but again, that's the fun of it, I feel, in terms of some of the moments that happen in this movie. Now, Josh, I know you said that you haven't seen this.
No.
But I would love to know, what you think of it once you, seen it.
I've been looking around last night when you told me about it, and I was going to try to watch it last night, but I couldn't find it anywhere. But it isn't, to me, it's an intriguing premise that I would like to see more of. I would like to see the whole story, and then I'd give you a more interesting, thoughtful insight into it. I think I'd seen the video tape cover back in the day when we had video stores. But I don't know why I never picked it up and just watched it. I think it looked a little bit, I think the monster standing behind the kid probably looked a little bit too campy, but I would now like to see this movie and really tell you more about what I think about it, so I will keep looking for it, and hopefully I will come across it soon. So,
all right, cool beans, man. Well, you have your honorable mention and your
yes.
number one. Go ahead.
Okay, so for my honorable mention, I have chosen 1998's Japanese horror classic Ringu, directed by Hideru Nagataka, and it's based upon a 1991 movie by Koji Suzuki. Basic premise of the film is there is a videotape. If you watch the videotape, which contains a number of series of disturbing images or very weird images, you will die within 7 days of watching it. This young reporter who is one thing I've learned about this was that apparently the supernatural and the paranormal are not uncommon subjects in a lot of Japanese films. She comes across it, she watches it, and then finds out that she has been cursed with it. And she and her ex-husband have to find a way to save her and also save her son, who inadvertently also watched the videotape. The reason I love this movie is at the time I saw it, I was despairing of finding anything new in horror to watch. And then suddenly the DVD wave took off and video stores started carrying more DVDs. And because DVDs are smaller than old VHS tapes, they could have more of them. And they were suddenly able to get content from other places that they had never thought they would be able to, get movies from. So this was one of them, and I had heard about it, so I watched it, and I was very intrigued with it. It was definitely something new and different that I really found interesting, and I got into the whole Asian horror thing when it happened. This movie, The Grudge, all of those movies. So that's why gets my honorable mention. Brandon, what is your honorable mention?
All right. Actually, go ahead and go into your number one, and then I'll get into my honorable mention.
I will go into my number one. So
go for it.
My number one overall favorite horror movie of all time, the 1973 classic William Friedkin's The Exorcist. I love this movie. It is based on the novel by William Peter Blatty. It takes place in 1970s Georgetown in Washington, D.C. Stars Alan Bernstein, Max von Sydow, Lee J. Cobb, Kitty Wynn, Jack McGowan, and Jason Miller, and of course, Linda Blair has Reagan McNeil. Basically, the movie opens up in Iraq on an archaeological dig, and where we find Max von Sydow working in as an archaeologist. We soon find out that he is actually a Catholic priest, and he is, he has basically found this artifact that from Sumerian times. And but that doesn't directly have anything to do with it until later in the film. The film then cuts to a scene at a rental house in Georgetown, where Ellen Bernstein is playing an actress who is in a film that's being filmed there at the Georgetown University. She is also a single mom. She's raising her daughter named Reagan. And after she finds out that her daughter has been playing with a Ouija board, Reagan begins to suddenly act very strange. Eventually, the episodes become violent to the point that no one can explain what is going on. So these doctors advise Ellen Bernstein to consult a Catholic priest. And she then meets Jason Miller, who plays a priest named Father Damien Karras, who is a priest, but he's also a psychiatrist. He is going through a massive crisis of faith because his elderly mother has recently died. And he is, feeling this sense of guilt because he was unable to help her. At first, Damien does not want to believe that Reagan is possessed, by a demon, but as the movie goes on, he discovers that, yes, this is very likely what is going on. And then Max von Sydow comes back into the movie because, as we find out, his character had once performed another exorcism years before, and it had nearly killed him. This movie, of course, is a massive classic. It is loosely based on a supposedly true event that happened with a young boy that was said to have been possessed. Also living in the Georgetown area. Blotti found out about the story, and he wrote the whole novel based on that. Of course, there are a lot of very weird things that people have attributed to. There was an electrical fire that nearly burned down the entire set of The Exorcist. A lot of things have added to the legend of this movie, like I just said about the burning down of the set, and then also a number of the cast members had family members who died. Max von Sydow's brother actually died while they were making the movie. Jason Miller, who plays Father Damien, he was a perfect choice at the time to play that character because apparently prior to becoming an actor, Miller had almost become a Catholic priest. So he kind of had the whole mannerisms. Friedkin, who wanted as much realism in the film as he could get, he actually cast a lot of priests as extras. And, in fact, this one priest at the end of the movie, it wasn't an actor. He actually was a priest. Apparently the set was also quite chaotic because Friedkin, would really push the actors to the point that I think a lot of them would today walk off the set because he was pretty abusive. Ellen Burstyn actually got injured in one scene, and Linda Blair, she also suffered back traumas because of one particular scene. I won't tell you which one, but when you see it, you know what happened. It is a really intense movie. It still stands up to this day. I think, even though, it was set in the early 1970s, but I think that, you can still see it. I have a really good friend of mine who just watched it about a year ago for the first time, and she said it scared the hell out of her and her friend, especially this one scene where they actually had a contortionist walk down the stairs, dressed up as Reagan, walk down the stairs crab fashion, like just turned upside down, like facing upwards, but crawling on their hands and feet. And it's a scene that freaks you out. It's very intense. So, Brandon, what are your thoughts?
So I know many people are thinking, I've done the top 10 so far, and they're like, why is this not in your top 10? And I will tell you why. Down the prerequisite, and you will probably know where I'm going with this, Josh, is
Yeah.
that, if it was a standalone, it absolutely would be not even in my top 10, it would be in my top 3. But there were other installments that were just not as good as the original, and it seemed like it was just a cash grab to be able to kind of take advantage of how iconic the original was. It was a second and third one,
Yeah.
and they're nowhere near at the level of the first one, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So if you just had that story, and then even down the line, we had it got rebooted again, and it was it was a toss up. I mean, I feel like the first one maybe with the one with Skarsgård in it, which he's in those prequels. That one I enjoy quite a bit. I think it's quite effective. But beyond that, like I feel like they kind of oftentimes when you have in Hollywood, they'll try to reestablish or try to try to get back kind of that magic that they have with a certain film when there's no intention of doing a sequel, and it shows. Sometimes when a franchise is being made, there's every intention of continuing the story forward, and then other times, the a film surprises you, and then after that there's a kind of a rush to kind of to experience that again, or to redo that magic, so to speak. And if it was just a standalone, like I said, it would be my top 3. But for that very reason, that there was those other installments, it fell short of being top 10 for me.
Yeah. I the second Exorcist 2, The Heretic, that was not a very good movie. You're right, that was a cash grab. It was pretty awful. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It was like, oh, okay, the first movie was really good, and of course, the second movie, Friedkin doesn't direct it. It's not based off of anything Blatty wrote. Whereas the third one, that was written and directed by William Peter Blatty. I get what you're saying, although I will say this: for the third movie, you do have that iconic scene where the statue is chasing the nurse down the hall, which is just scary as hell.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. I also like the Skarsgård one, which is a prequel, because Skarsgård is basically playing the Max von Sydow character in that movie. That's good. I did not enjoy the television show. I couldn't get into it. I don't know what it was. Yeah, it seemed interesting at first. I will say this. I have heard that Blumhouse is kind of doing the Halloween thing to The Exorcist, that Ellen Burstyn is coming back and is going to be playing the same character 50 years later. I don't know how exactly this is going to work, but I'm kind of intrigued. I at least want to see the first one to see what's happening, because I thought at first they were going to remake it. I was like, oh no, please don't remake this. This is like, no, I will burn them. No, I won't do that. But I will stand outside the movie theater and pout if you remade this movie. But I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to do something. I think it's going to do justice, because I think Jordan Peele is going to be involved, and I kind of have a little confidence here. So, yeah. So
cool. All right. So my honorable mention, guys. Actually, I feel it falls in the same camp as the film that we just talked about, and mine is The Omen. So like going back to a lot of those films where you have a film that deals with, I want to say this is probably one of the first films that I can think of, and I'm sure there are others, but these are one of the hallmark films where you have the creepy kid. Like you always have you have the kind of that subgenre of horror films where we have creepy kids at like the center of this story, and just that idea of the child of the devil, and what that entails and what that looks like, and all the horrible events that happen over the course of this character's life. So I mean, and that's the reason why it was really tricky. It almost made my top 10 because of the other films that have been in there. Like the second one is actually quite good. The third one, I enjoy Sam Neill in that role, but just overall, I enjoy the second one far better in terms of kind of seeing that heel change of our character of Damien, still not really aware of his identity. At least in the first one, I feel like it was more subconscious because he was so young. The character is so young, but as he's getting into his formative years as a teenager, as a young man, he's still not really aware of that lineage that he has. And then when he finally buys into that lineage, it was quite scary, of him really buying into, this is who I am, I have to, this is the path that I have, so I need to go, this is the path that I'm going. Seeing that journey is what made the second one quite good. But yeah, just overall as a franchise, I enjoyed it, quite a bit, and just having those franchises that have the that creepy kid at the center of the story. Some of them, don't get me wrong, or can be quite corny, but there are some out there, and The Omen being one of the primary ones that are quite effective in its ability to tell that story, and the uncertainty that comes, that uncertainty of pregnancy, and then that couples have, when they're pregnant, and then raising your kid, and raising that kid in terms of trying to raise that kid to be a decent person, as a human being growing up, and then the it kind of goes with that idea of what is it, something against nurture, but I want to say, I forgot the saying. I'm brain farting on what the saying is. But just that idea of, are you really, can your, not your pedigree, but your who you've come from, can that really determine or predetermine the person that you're going to be? And in this story, as I said, it goes a certain direction, but I've seen it in other stories too, where it's gone the other direction, where you're going against what that upbringing is, or what that destiny is perceived to be. So that is my honorable mention. You guys have heard what you probably, maybe in other shows you've heard what my number one is, but I will tell you anyway. My number one is, dun dun dun, John Carpenter's The Thing. So, in talking about this film, released in 1982, yeah, we have another 1982 film. I don't know what it was about 1982 that we had some terrific horror films, but the basic premise is that you have a situation where you're introduced to this dog that's being shot at by these group of a group of men that are trying to take out this dog, and you're trying to figure out why that is. But the dog ends up encountering another settlement that's over in Antarctica, and over the course of that time, you think that maybe the folks that were shooting at this dog, maybe they were just nuts or crazy, but as the story unravels, you come to find out that there's more to this dog than meets the eye. And I'm not going to get into all the details of what we learn about this dog, but I'll just go into the idea of the thing that's so great about this film is that it deals with the idea of, I know you were talking about it before, Josh, the idea of identity, and how important one's identity is to someone, and how scary it can be when the folks next to you that you feel that are not the people that it's just that paranoia of, and that claustrophobic feeling of thinking, being around, your closest friends and family perhaps, and then having the tables turned on you and finding out that they aren't who you think they are. There is a horror element to that. And I mean, don't get me wrong, you have the other tropes in there. This movie is very gory. There are a lot of, for gore hounds, there are a lot of gore moments to enjoy, but the reason why this is my number one is that even though this is a horror film, it functions, I feel, if you pluck certain elements out of it, it still works just as a film in and of itself. You can pluck it in any genre and it works very well. Like, even if you take all the gore elements out of it, just the overall premise of, what the entity or the monster that we have in this film, what it's capable of, and how it works and how it functions, it it works at on that level of just that idea of paranoia and not knowing who you can trust. So that functions not only as like a thriller, it functions as a mystery, it functions as science fiction. Like, there's so many levels I feel to this film that make it work so well. And and speaking of ensembles, you have incredible ensemble, with this film too. And talking about a lot of the films that I've enjoyed, the who you have cast in those roles are so, vital. You have Kurt Russell, you have Wilford Brimley, you have T.K. Carter. I mean, you have Keith David, the great Keith David. Gosh, like you could continue down the list of all the other actors. Donald Moffat. I could just go on and on. And as I said, it's one of my favorite directors too. You have John Carpenter, who has done a multitude of other films. I mean, he was already on your list, in the other films that we named already, Josh, with Halloween. But I mean, I can also think of Big Trouble in Little China. There's an anthology film that not a lot of people really talk a whole bunch about, and that's Body Bags. I don't know if you've seen that, Josh, but that's an anthology film that John Carpenter did. So yeah, like you have my favorite director, you have some incredible actors a part of your ensemble, and it functions, not just as a horror film, but on other levels with other genres. And in speaking of, another facet of it, the practical effects. Like, these days we really a lot of films seem to rely on, visual effects. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that because the technology is there to be able to do that. But at the same time, because of the limitations that this film had, they had to do a lot of things. They pretty much had to do everything, right there in the moment on camera. And because of that limitation, it worked to their advantage where, a lot of it seems very real of what they were able to accomplish with a lot of the practical effects and puppetry that they did with this film. That a lot of films that, have huge budgets don't have a good, can't seem to sometimes struggle with being able to replicate. So, Josh, your thoughts on The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing?
Well, I have to say it is a real hard call for me to decide. I really do think this is his best movie, although, you're right. He does have an incredible body of work. Big Trouble in Little China, Halloween, The Fog, Assault on Precinct 13. This, it is, again, like Event Horizon, you're in this massively isolated area. They can't escape this thing, but the thing can't escape either. And Kurt Russell, I mean, he plays this, tailor-made hero that is so perfect for this because he's realized we can't leave, but we can't let the thing leave either. We have to stop this thing because if it gets out of here, it's going to destroy the world. And yeah, the practical effects are amazing because obviously there was no such thing as CGI back then. And thankfully, yeah, I mean, I'm glad they went this direction because even though these things were puppets and things that were animatronic that were, controlled with remote controls, they're so alien in their movements that they're more believable than anything else we've ever seen since. And like the scenes when, because this thing could adapt and instantaneously evolve to whatever it needs to be at any moment. Like at one point when the head, turns into kind of a crab-like creature or a giant spider-like creature in order to get away. And it is so wonderfully described that, okay, on a molecular level, it can come apart. It can make dozens of other organisms in order to.
And I'm gonna pause real quick because I want to leave it as something that people can enjoy if you guys have not seen it. So I don't want to go too deep into all the stuff that's revealed about it. But go ahead.
But yeah, it is scary. You actually do feel the cold every time I've seen it. I feel like I'm there in Antarctica with these guys. I feel like I need to be wearing a parka because it's so cold. One thing though is I never do quite understand why is it that they're there? What's going on that those guys have to be there? Are they doing some sort of research? Because they don't seem like scientists to me. But other than that,
No, I do recall it. I'm brain farting on what it was, but it is, they are isolated for a certain period of months in terms of what their
yeah,
job entails being there at that colony or at that facility.
yeah. But another thing is it does kind of feel like sort of a Wild West, because certainly I think Carpenter and Russell were both influenced a lot by westerns growing up, and in some ways, like the scene when the dog runs into camp and it's being chased by the Swedish guys in the helicopter trying to kill it. Um, again, it goes back to kind of like a Clint Eastwood western of this isolated area. You know,
For sure.
yeah, just a great movie. Um,
Cool beans, cool beans. Yep, go ahead.
yeah, one other thing is going to this, of course, is based off of it's based off of two things. It's based off of the novella by John Campbell called "Who Goes There," but also by a 1950s horror film called "The Thing from Outer Space," in which it's the same premise: alien monster invades this Antarctica research station or something, and they have to destroy it before it gets out and destroys the human race. Which, if you go back to the original Halloween, you see the kids watching that movie in the background, and so it was clearly one of John Carpenter's favorite movies, and he really wanted to remake it, and he got to make it, and of course his version is the one we all think of now because it's so scary, and it's amazing, and Kurt Russell and Keith David and the rest of the cast, incredible bunch of guys, just brilliant casting.
And I would say this too. I know you brought up the original. The original, from what I understand, is they had to change some things because the technology wasn't there to do the creatures, so they had to be a little more creative and change around like how the creature worked.
Yeah.
But in terms of the original short story, John Carpenter has gone on record and said that he tried to stick closer to, even though it is technically a remake, in terms
Yeah.
of how he executed it, he tried to stick closer to the source material of what the story was about or what it entailed. So
Yeah.
there is that to be said. So even though it is technically a remake, he is. I feel like it's more of a spiritual remake in that there are some things that he changed around and make it more accurate to the original source material.
Yeah, well, it's more accurate to the source material.
Because
Yeah,
they were able to do more with the practical effects than they were able to do back then.
exactly. But the early '80s too,
Yeah.
so that so it's not set in the early 20th century; it's set in the '80s. So yeah, that really helps it a lot too.
But with that being said, guys, we're going to wrap up right here. Thank you guys so much for hopping on and listen to us talk about our top 10 and our honorable mentions. Before we head off, Josh, can you share, plug some of the things that you got going, man?
Well, I have just recently published my first short story collection. It's called Bigfoot and Other Tales of the Supernatural. You can find it on Amazon and Kindle. And I'm also now working on my next Brave New Girls short story. We are going into the 6th anthology that should be out later in 2022. And I am also working on a new novel project too.
All right, cool beans. So yes, switching off. I am your host, Brandon Choi, host and co-creator of Movers and Shakers Unlimited. As I said, thank you guys so much for joining this Halloween episode that we have. Don't forget, as I mentioned earlier today, is that next week. I'll be at Rhode Island Comic Con, and I'll be moderating at Rhode Island Comic Con. So don't forget that there are 2 panels that are happening on Saturday at 11:30 with Bill Dahman, 2 o'clock with Freddie Prinze Jr. and Rachel Lee Cook, and Sunday with Chandler Riggs. Excuse me, I'm saying Chandler Miller, Chandler Riggs of The Walking Dead guys. So look forward to that. And otherwise, I will see you next time. Later. Later, guys. Oh, hold on. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Yes, indeed. Happy Halloween. Till next time.